Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gripe, the show where I do short, sweet reviews of new release movies, plus the one thing that annoyed me the most. And this week I have a special, very exciting one, and that is Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. This one's going to be a little bit longer because I could talk about Star Wars for an hour and not get to a single point because that's how much I love Star Wars and how much I have just obsessed over Star Wars my entire life. And now, as an adult, I finally get to see a new continuation of the story. So, I'm going to go back a little bit. So, before even going to episode 7, I had obviously very high hopes, but also had a lot of reservations because, let's face it, the prequel trilogy was not what we wanted or what we needed for our Star Wars continuation of the story and building the universe. Episodes 4, 5, and 6, the original trilogy that came out in the late 70s, early 80s, was phenomenal in so many ways. Obviously, it has its flaws like any movie series, but it was phenomenal and it was a phenomenon. And so when we finally got an opportunity to see how the story began, how we got Anakin Skywalker's origins, we got the prequels starting in 99 and ending in 2005. What came of those movies was a disaster on so many levels, and it started actually earlier than that. It started in the mid 90s when George Lucas re-released the original trilogy with some updates and added some added effects. There were a couple of deleted scenes that they threw into the movies to make them a little bit more robust and more to the kind of the vision that he originally had. Now that he had technology on his side, it had finally caught up to what his vision was. So then we got the prequel trilogy, which, right off the bat with episode 1 was not really a good omen of what this was going to end up being. And by the time he got through episode 3, it was, episode 3 was not the worst of the 3, but it certainly was not on par with what the original trilogy had set up. The original, the prequel trilogy was just riddled with, horrible melodrama, terrible writing, underdeveloped characters, and just a lot of excess, which the original trilogy did not have. The original trilogy was not built on this excess. It was not built on melodrama. It was built on drama, but also fun. It had fun character to it, and it, really did flesh out the characters. Empire Strikes Back is an entire character story when you learn more about Luke Skywalker and you learn more about the Force and all this. And the original and the prequel trilogy just did not have that level of care for its characters. It was more about, well, let's throw some really cliche drama in there. Let's throw some you know sort of middling character development stuff in there, and let's just throw every effect we can imagine at this thing. And so the prequel trilogy really dampened what made Star Wars so beautiful and so amazing from the original trilogy. So obviously going into episode 7 there is some fear because it's being taken away by George Lucas, which was the good thing, but the bad thing is now it's being handed over to Disney. And Disney chose for their director J.J. Abrams, who did did the Star Trek reboot. So he did the Star Trek reboot movie plus Into Darkness. The reboot was fantastic. The first movie with Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto and Zoe Saldana was a fantastic movie. Just loads of fun, a little bit more action than Star Trek might be, less on the sci-fi and more on the action, but still just an all-around very fun movie, very exciting. Into Darkness, little less fun, little less exciting, and definitely a lot more of just the same that we have seen, because it kind of took the Wrath of Khan story, not to give away any spoilers, but if you haven't seen it by now, that's your loss. But it kind of took the Wrath of Khan story and just threw it against the wall and said, "Oh, here's a new version of Wrath of Khan," kind of. So definitely not the direction that they wanted to go with Star Trek, but at least one thing that he proved with the first Star Trek movie was that he could bring fun back to the series. Not to say that the series never lost that fun, because I'm not as much of a Star Trek fan, but it definitely added a new level of fun, which Abrams brought to Mission Impossible. He also brought to the television shows that he did, like Alias and Lost to a minor extent. He was really more just the executive producer for that show, but definitely like Alias And so when they chose him for director, I was very excited for episode 7. I was really excited to see what Abrams could bring to the Star Wars universe, just like he had brought with Star Trek, but hopefully with less lens flare. But there's still lens flare. And so what we got was episode 7, The Force Awakens. And the story is set about 30 years after the events of Return of the Jedi. And to kind of give you background into the movie, if you haven't seen it, I don't know who you are, because the movie has made, $2 billion around the world at this point. I've already seen it 3 times. And obviously it's a phenomenon in itself, which, we'll get to that a little bit. But the story starts, roughly 30 years after Return of the Jedi, so the Empire is destroyed, but doesn't mean that the Empire is gone. It means that the Emperor is dead, and the Empire has kind of fizzled, but in its wake comes what's called the First Order. And the First Order is basically like the Empire, just, different name, different leader, kind of a little bit different rules. They're up against a group called the Republic, who is trying to rebuild the Republic that was destroyed by the rise of the Empire, which, we got, that to a degree in the prequels. I mean, obviously they threw it at us a lot, but I don't think they did a very good job of really stressing the importance of why this was such a bad thing. And so with the Republic kind of rising, challenging the First Order, it's sort of this like war of who's in charge of the government of the galaxy. And the Republic has kind of in their pocket, but just not officially, they're more of like a splinter militia group, is what's called the Resistance. And this is what the rebellion has become, basically, is the Resistance. And they're led by Princess Leia, who's General Leia now. And so you've got these kind of warring factions, and the movie begins where somebody from the Resistance, a pilot named Poe, is going to get a map to find Luke Skywalker, because, as the opening crawl says, Luke Skywalker has vanished. And obviously Luke Skywalker is a very important character here, because in Return of the Jedi, he basically becomes the last Jedi, the last known Jedi at least. Because when Yoda dies, after training him, he's it. That is it. So Luke is now the lone Jedi in the universe. And so anybody who's on the dark side obviously wants to find him, because he could very easily train new Jedi and kind of rebuild that, the Jedi Order, using the good side of the Force. And so, but he's vanished. And you don't know why at first, but you find out a little bit later that he was training, a new generation of Jedi, and one of them betrayed him and basically killed all the other trainees and sent Luke into exile in a sense. I mean, Luke went into exile himself, but it was because of this, failed pupil that caused him to do that. And that pupil happens to be one of the main characters in this movie, Kylo Ren. So Kylo Ren is very much he's very much a dark side of the Force kind of guy, but at the same time, he's also, there's some turmoil in him that's not nearly as clean as somebody like Darth Vader when you first see him in episode 4. He's got a lot, he definitely feeds his emotions a lot more than you've seen from like Darth Vader or some of the other Sith characters that we've seen throughout the series. Anyway, Poe goes to get this map, and the First Order comes, captures him, and Poe gives the map to his BB8 unit, which is just a little droid, a little ball, an adorable ball droid, and basically they take him to try and torture him and find out where the map is and all that. But and as BB8 escapes, comes across this woman who lives on this desert planet. Her name is Rey, and Rey doesn't really want anything to do with him, but she doesn't want him to like be, she can tell that there's something special about him, but she also just kind of wants to do her own thing, because she's waiting for her family to come back. She's been abandoned basically on this desert planet. And then Poe, in his, while he's in the hands of the First Order, a stormtrooper who, in the first scene, basically sees what the First Order is capable of and sees their kind of murderous intentions, he basically breaks Poe out and they escape. And when he gets to, in their escape, they get shot down and they land on the planet. And he comes across Rey and the BB-8 unit, and the two of them sort of set off on an adventure, and they come across Han Solo and Chewbacca. So, the original trilogy comes comes right back into the story. And these two basically say this BB8 unit has something important with it as a map to Luke Skywalker, and so it has to go back to the Resistance before the First Order gets it. And the rest of the movie is essentially, they're trying to find the Resistance as well as the First Order trying to find them. And you start to get kind of a sense of who these characters are. You've got the stormtrooper. His name is Finn. That's not his name at the beginning of the movie. His name at the beginning of the movie is basically is FN2187, which he's not a name. He's a number. He's just a random stormtrooper basically. But in their escape, Poe says he doesn't like that name, so he calls him Finn. Poe is very much like the fun character. He's almost, I wouldn't call him the comic relief, but he's certainly, the cocky, arrogant kind of Han Solo type of character for the new generation of Star Wars characters. Very fun, X-wing pilot, very cool. He's definitely a guy you want to root for. And Finn is, he's, knowledgeable, but he's also very, aware of the situation that he's coming from, and he's trying to run away from that because he just knows firsthand the raw power that the First Order has. And Rey, she gets kind of caught in this, saying, she doesn't really want a part of it. She wants to wait for her family to come back because she believes that her family left her there for a reason and they will come back for her. And you don't get a lot about who her family is, but that's because it's, it's probably one of those mysteries that they want to keep for the second installment of this new trilogy. But, they go off on their adventures and you start to get more about who these characters are, and you see that she actually has some, connection to the Force in her. And you're not sure to what extent or where she got it or how she's going to use it. You just know that there's something inside her that is special and perhaps maybe even a little bit dangerous. So, ultimately the story, I don't want to give away too many of the spoilers because it's... Realistically, though, I could give away a lot of spoilers because you've already seen this movie to some degree. The plot of The Force Awakens is very much in line with what we saw in A New Hope, Episode 4, the original Star Wars. You basically have, the Empire, or this large government group trying to track down a droid who has sensitive information that lands on a desert planet and falls into the hands of basically a nobody, and that nobody actually has some important value to the story, and then they escape and go off on this grand adventure, and at the end of it there's a giant star base that has to be destroyed. If it sounds like Episode 4, that's because it's extremely similar to the plot of Episode 4, which has been one of the primary criticisms of this movie. So I've given you kind of a sense of what this movie is. Let me kind of address some of that criticism, because in a way I agree with it. I agree that they really took a safe route. They took this story that we have known for 30 plus years, and they just kind of went the safe route. They said, okay, we know this story, we've heard it multiple times, we've told it over and over again, and even they told it even in the prequel trilogy basically. And now it's for a new generation. They're creating this new group of characters that we're going to be following for the next few years, if not beyond. But they went the safe route. And by going the safe route, it kind of leaves you going, okay, I enjoyed it, but it almost seems like they didn't really tread any new ground. All they did was introduce some new characters, they kind of created some new drama, but for the most part, they didn't add anything significant to the story. And that's not my key gripe, but it is something that I certainly agree with. Now, I understand why they did it too, because I've talked about how much the prequels really did drop the ball. I mean, George Lucas really dropped the ball with the prequels. Visually, they're amazing. Like, they have fantastic visuals, and there's a lot of amazing stuff that he did with those movies. But, for one, they did not feel like Star Wars. And two, they really just kind of... they took too many risks. And I'm not saying that taking risks is a bad thing. What I'm saying is that if you take a risk and it doesn't pay off, the only way to get back to normal is to kind of go the safer route. And my guess is Disney did this intentionally. They kind of did the group think. It's like, okay, how do we make sure that we do not fall down the same path that the prequels went? One is that you don't give one person too much influence. And because that's what George had basically with the prequels. It was like, okay, George, you know what you're doing, so you just go ahead and do it. By not doing that, you lose some of that, individuality and that creativity, which is why the movie does feel like, it's a safe, it's a fun movie, but it doesn't really expand too much. So it feels it's an entertaining movie. It's a great, addition to the story, but it's not something that's going to, the fact that it's, one of the highest grossing movies ever now shouldn't really be a surprise, but it also kind of should be, because it is one that's like, okay, this is a great start to a story. It's not a story in itself. It's a great start to what we should be seeing. And they do a lot of things in this movie that actually, subtly, I think, work, but it doesn't necessarily advance the story a lot, except in a sense of which character they're focusing on. The movie centers around Rey, really. I mean, she is the main character. I mean, if you had to say what are the main characters of this movie, you have Rey, you have Finn, and you have Kylo Ren. Those are really the three main characters. Poe is pretty important. Han Solo plays a pretty, valuable role in this too. And Luke Skywalker also does play a valuable role as sort of this like other figure. Even though he's not in the movie for very long, he plays a pretty integral role in the progression of the story. But the story really does focus on Rey and Kylo Ren as kind of the two focal points of this story, the good and the bad kind of. And one of the things that they do really well in this movie that a lot of people might not notice unless you're looking for it is that they really do kind of break some of those traditional gender trends with movies. They actually make Rey a more important character even in some subconscious ways, like just her position in a scene where, Finn is on a lower step than she is, so she's looking down at Finn. Typically in movies, when you have like a man and a woman speaking to one another, the man is looking down at the woman. There's that dominant kind of like, not just that they're taller, but just this sort of dominant position. But they flipped it in one scene, and that kind of goes to the whole thing of, just how important Rey is and how much they're trying to build her up as a character. Even though they didn't give us a lot on it in this movie, they definitely are saying this is the important character in the story. This is, you've got, Finn, you've got Rey and Kylo Ren. Those are the three, and Poe too. Those are the ones who are going to carry this story through, and they really did emphasize the importance of Rey, especially. So what about the movie itself? What do I think? I loved it in a sense that I loved that they, added these new characters. The new characters are fun. They brought fun back to the series, which is something that was sorely missing in the prequels. That they when they tried to do it, it just felt awkward. But here it feels very like natural, almost at times too fun. It's like, wow, you guys are really enjoying this despite the fact that you're about to die. So they really did kind of bring that fun back to the series. And that's great. The new characters, I love them. I absolutely adore the characters that they brought in. Rey, Finn, Poe, just a great like trio of people you want to root for. And Kylo Ren, probably the most controversial character from this story, is a great character in the sense that because it challenges you to, people are going to love him or hate him, but it really does challenge you as to what he gives you. Who is this character? What is behind this character? You learn a lot about him in the movie, but you know that there's also so much more that they're going to bring about of who this character is. And yeah, it's one of those absolutely controversial things that came out of the movie was who Kylo Ren is and just how well he was portrayed. Because some people thought he was really bland, and I can see that in a sense because he's very subdued. But it's what I saw was somebody who's like really struggling with their identity and not knowing what direction they're going or who they really are. I thought I thought they did a really good job with kind of that struggle of who this character is and how even he was struggling with trying to understand who his character is. So what though is my key gripe? And it's hard because I have to take off the rose-colored glasses because even though I am a Star Wars fanatic, there are things in this movie that just did not work for me. And there were moments that I absolutely adored. There were moments that actually made me cry. But then there were also moments that had me scratching my head and going, why? What value does this add? And to be perfectly honest, the thing that annoyed me the most was the final battle. And the reason that the final battle really annoyed me was because, and I'm not actually, so let me clarify this. There's kind of, at the final battle, there's two things happening. There's the attack on Starkiller Base, and then there's sort of the personal struggle, with Han Solo and Finn and Rey and all them kind of, their incursion on Starkiller Base. But the battle itself, it's fun, but the problem is that there's nothing new about it. There's absolutely nothing new. Of all this, the story I can understand because you're working off a paradigm. Star Wars is built on paradigms, and this is one that definitely, I mean, the paradigm here works. It does to introduce the characters. But there's a difference between paradigms and just straight up taking, the exact same story and redoing it. It's almost like they are remaking the first movie. It's almost like, throughout the story you're like, okay, I can take the paradigm, but when you get to this particular scene, it's almost like it makes it into a remake, which I don't like. I don't like that idea because Star Wars can be so much more than this. And with the battle on Starkiller, they have the X-wings and TIE fighters, fighting each other, doing their dogfight. And then there's a trench run. There is a literal trench run. It's not nearly as operatic as the one in New Hope, but it certainly is there. You have the same exact finale. Like it, they did it in New Hope, they did it in Return of the Jedi, and now they're doing it here in Force Awakens. But here it just feels the most like it's less of a paradigm and more of we're redoing this. We're giving you, it's like the new generation gets to do the trench run. It's almost the same exact thing with the only exception of instead of, Han Solo swooping in and, giving Luke that one last moment to, destroy the Death Star, it's pretty much down to one guy. You get, Poe Dameron, who's just like the ace and just, flies right through. It's a cool scene, but it's the one thing that really was like this almost makes it a remake, and it's really hard to argue against it. And obviously I have a lot of hope that in episodes 8 and 9 they're going to tread new ground because the characters they created, there's a chance that episode 8 could have some Empire Strikes Back type of like training and introspection and stuff like that, but I do see that there's a lot more potential for there to be some divergence from what we saw in the original trilogy. So hopeful. I mean, I'm very hopeful for episode 8. Rian Johnson's going to be directing it. He did Looper. I wasn't a big fan of Looper, but I could definitely see where his particular talent could come in. But I'm very excited for that one to see what they do with it. And I hope that they do take more risks. But I think since they played it safe here and they saw that it was successful and people did react to it the way that they were hoping, I mean, maybe it wasn't, obviously it wasn't perfect. You still had plenty of people saying, look, this is I'm glad you didn't take a risk because, we didn't get something completely off the wall like episode 1. But at the same time, we want to see something new. We want to see something better than another Death Star, another trench run, another, one of those type of stories. So hopefully episode 8, we do see some more risks being taken. But at the same time, I want to see them build on what they did here. Keep it fun. Keep it, light when it needs to be, but also heavy when it needs to be. Keep building these characters. Do a lot more character building because this movie does not have enough character building, and some of that's just to keep the mystery. It's like, who are these people? Who is Rey? What happened between Kylo Ren and Luke? Like, what all this happens? And the reason I have so much hope is that the end of this movie was awesome. And a lot of people might disagree, but I thought the very end of this movie was fantastic. Like the perfect way to end this movie is exactly what they did. I mean, maybe not perfect, but it was definitely an excellent way to end it. And it gives me hope that, okay, episode 8 is going to build on this. Hopefully they can get rid of the cliche, or not the cliche necessarily, but hopefully they can get rid of some of this, like, going back and just building it entirely on nostalgia and doing something new with these characters, because there is a lot of room to grow. There is some fantastic characters that they've brought in, and I want to see where they go with it. So my review of Star Wars Episode 7, like I said, I could go for an hour, but I'm just going to stop it right here because I think I've bored you long enough. But my review of Star Wars Episode 7, I would give it a 7.5 out of 10, which means it's a very good movie. Not perfect, needs some, could use, a little bit more, but at the same time, definitely something that was worth my time 3 times over, and I would totally see it again. Um, but also just a good starting point for what I think could be a fantastic trilogy. Hopefully Ryan Johnson can do it, and episode 9 I'm a little less enthusiastic about because Colin Trevorrow is doing it, but at the same time, if this team stays together and does what they're doing, does what they do well, take the good stuff out of episode 7 and continue to build on that, I think it'll be a great trilogy. So that's my review of Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, and may the Force be with you. See you next time.